The night Alcatraz was beaten began quietly, the way all great crimes do, without drama, without noise, without anyone realizing history was being rewritten. Pull up a chair, kid. Pour yourself something stiff. You want the truth about the rock? Not the brochure version, but the grimy, salt-crusted reality that keeps the feds awake in their suburban beds. Then pay attention. Like this video. Subscribe to the channel and settle in. For nearly 30 years, Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary had sold the same promise to the American public. No one escapes. The rock wasn't just a prison. It was a psychological weapon. A slab of freezing stone planted in the middle of San Francisco Bay, surrounded by vicious currents, icy water, and the constant reminder of freedom just out of reach. Prisoners could hear laughter drifting from the city on weekends. They could see lights, cars, movement, life, while they rotted in silence. That cruelty was intentional. It was the San Francisco treat nobody asked for. Alcatraz didn't exist to rehabilitate. It existed to break men who could not be broken elsewhere. The worst of the worst were sent there. Gangsters, escape artists, career criminals. Men who laughed at other prisons learned very quickly that Alcatraz did not laugh back. It was the end of the line, a concrete dead end, where the only thing cheaper than the life of an inmate was the quality of the government-issued tobacco. And yet, on the night of June 11th, 1962, 3 men slipped past its teeth and vanished into the dark. To this day, no one knows for sure what happened to them, though the Bureau of Prisons would love for you to believe they're fish food. But the truth, when you strip away the myths, is far stranger, cleverer, and more human than the legend. Let's talk about the crew. You don't pull a job like this with amateurs. Frank Morris wasn't born a criminal, but he was born wrong for society. Intelligent to the point of isolation, with an IQ reportedly measured at 133, that's genius territory. For a guy who spent his life in the yard, he bounced through foster homes and institutions as a child. He learned early that rules were flexible things, enforced by people far less clever than he was. By his teens, Frank was stealing. By his 20s, he was escaping prisons. He didn't just run. He studied systems, watched routines, memorized weaknesses. Each escape landed him in a worse facility, until the government finally ran out of patience and sent him to the Rock in January 1960. He was inmate AZ 1441. Just a number, but a number that knew how to multiply. Then you had the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence. They arrived soon after, like a bad omen in matching denim. They were different from Morris, Southern boys from Georgia, raised dirt poor, tight as blood and bone. They weren't your typical city slickers. They were farm boys who knew how to work with their hands and swim in murky water. They robbed banks not out of cruelty, but calculation. They used toy guns, for crying out loud. Quiet, disciplined, loyal to each other above all else. They'd tried to escape prison before, too, successfully, but never violently. What tied all 3 men together wasn't desperation. It was confidence. They believed Alcatraz was not impossible, just difficult. Now here's the dirt the history books like to gloss over. Alcatraz liked to pretend it was indestructible, but the prison was already rotting when Morris arrived. It was a beautiful corpse. The salt air gnawed at the concrete like a hungry dog. Pipes leaked. Walls crumbled if you pressed hard enough. The cells, narrow concrete coffins, had ventilation grates no one bothered to inspect closely because no one believed they mattered. The Bureau was cheap, see? They let the place fall apart while they spent the budget on guard uniforms and bullets. Frank Morris noticed immediately. He saw the salt rot. He saw the way the moisture from the bay made the mortar soft as wet bread. Each night, when the sounds of the prison faded and the bay wind howled outside, he worked a stolen spoon against the vent beneath his sink. Slowly, patiently. He wasn't just digging. He was sculpting a miracle. He covered his work with cardboard stolen from the trash, painted to match the walls using toothpaste mixed with stolen pigment. If you looked at it from 3 feet away, it looked like solid wall. If you looked at it with the eyes of a lazy guard on the graveyard shift, It looked like nothing at all. When the Anglin brothers were transferred to neighboring cells, Morris brought them in. Soon, Alan West joined them, a fourth man, crucial to the plan, but destined to be its tragic flaw. West was the one who did a lot of the heavy lifting in the shadows, but history treats him like the guy who missed the bus. This wasn't a desperate scramble. This was engineering. They stole spoons from the cafeteria. They scavenged broken vacuum motors and rewired them into a makeshift drill. They played accordions loudly during music hour so the sound masked the scraping of concrete. Can you imagine it? The haunting squeezebox melody echoing through the halls while behind the walls, the very foundation of the inevitable, was being hollowed out. Over months, they hollowed out vents big enough to crawl through. Above their cells was an unguarded utility corridor. No cameras, no motion sensors, just dusty pipes and darkness. Alcatraz's greatest defense, its reputation, had made it lazy. The guards thought the island was the cage. They forgot the cell was the only thing keeping the men in. Then came the centerpiece, the most ridiculous masterpiece in prison history. Escaping the cell was only half the problem. Guards counted heads constantly. If a man disappeared, the entire prison would lock down in minutes. So Morris devised one of the boldest tricks in criminal history. From soap, toothpaste, toilet paper, and stolen hair from the barbershop floor, the men sculpted dummy heads, ghastly, pale, disturbingly human. They painted them with flesh-toned scraps from the art room. They shaded them, gave them real hair, even carved wrinkles and eyelashes. At night, they placed the heads under blankets, arranged towels to mimic shoulders, and lay them just right, so guards shining flashlights through the bars would see exactly what they expected to see: sleeping men. The dummies were so convincing that when guards finally discovered them, some reportedly screamed. Imagine being a guard, poking a sleeping inmate, and his head rolls off the bed and bounces across the floor. That's the stuff of nightmares, kid. But then there was the water. San Francisco Bay doesn't just wet you, it kills you. The water is cold enough to induce hypothermia within minutes. The currents shift unpredictably, pulling toward the Golden Gate and out into the crushing Pacific. Sharks were rumored, mostly the sand shark variety, which won't eat you, but the guards let the rumors fly to keep the men scared. No official escape had ever succeeded. Every man who tried ended up back in cuffs or floating face down in the surf. So Morris and the Anglins turned to raincoats. Over 50 of them. They weren't just found. They were pilfered, bartered, and traded for over months. They stitched them together, melting seams with steam pipes in the utility corridor, sealing edges with heat. The result was a crude but functional inflatable raft, about 6 by 14 feet, complete with a makeshift air valve and life vests. They tested it secretly, inflating it with a concertina bellows Morris built from scrap. It wasn't elegant. It was brilliant. June 11th, 1962. The night the world stopped making sense for the warden. Lights out. Guards passed. The prison settled into its familiar hush. One by one, Morris and the Anglins slipped through their vents and into the service corridor. Alan West tried to follow, but his vent, which he'd been too nervous to finish properly, wouldn't widen enough. He'd used too much cement to patch the edges, and it had hardened like iron. He was stuck. There was no time to help him. The others didn't wait. In the world of the Rock, loyalty only goes as far as the vent cover. The trio climbed up plumbing pipes, squeezed through a vent to the rooftop, and shimmed across the roof in full view of the guard towers. They used a kitchen vent pipe to slide 50 feet down to the ground. They reached the northeastern shore of the island, hidden from the sweep of the searchlights. They inflated the raft. They pushed off at 11:30 p.m., timing their escape with the outgoing tide Morris had calculated for weeks. Morris was a math whiz, remember? He knew that if they left at the right moment, the water wouldn't fight them. It would carry them. Then they vanished into the fog. Morning came, and with it, the usual routine. A guard named Bill Long went to do the count. He tapped the bars. No response. He reached in to shake John Anglin awake, and that's when the dummy head tumbled. The scream that followed probably echoed all the way to Fisherman's Wharf. The alarm exploded across the island. Searchlights scoured the bay. Boats circled. Helicopters combed the water. The FBI descended with quiet fury. They had to find them. If they didn't, the myth of Alcatraz was dead, and the government hates it when their myths die. Within days, the bits started showing up. A paddle fragment, scraps of rubber, a plastic bag containing personal photos and addresses belonging to the Anglins. The FBI clung to these like life preservers. See, they told the press, they fell apart, they drowned, the rock wins again. It was neat, clean, reassuring, but the evidence didn't behave the way it should have. No bodies surfaced, ever, and the bay is a very effective delivery system for corpses. Usually they wash up within a week. No bones washed ashore. No personal effects conclusively tied to death. The FBI closed the case in 1979 after 17 years, admitting privately that survival was possible, but publicly maintaining the drowning theory because it looked better on the letterhead. But you want the gossip? The stuff the marshals still chew on? Let's talk about the blue Chevrolet. On the night of the escape, a motorist reported seeing a car with 3 men inside speeding away from the shore near the Golden Gate Bridge. Then there's the story of a raft found on Angel Island and footprints leading away from it. The FBI suppressed the report because it didn't fit the drowned in the bay narrative. And the ghosts? They wouldn't stay buried. Flowers began appearing in Brazil, left anonymously on Mother's Day for the Anglin brothers' mother every year until her death. No return address. Just the flowers. A Christmas card arrived years later, postmarked from South America, with handwriting that family members swore belonged to the boys. To Mom, from John, Happy Christmas. You think a dead man sends a card? Then there's the photo. In the 1970s, a family friend of the Anglins, a guy named Fred Brizzi, claimed he met the brothers in Brazil. He produced a photograph of 2 men standing in front of a termite mound. They were older, tan, wearing sunglasses, looking like 2 guys who'd spent a lot of time in the sun. Modern facial recognition experts, real pros, not the TV kind, have looked at that photo and compared it to the brothers' mugshots. The match? It's high. Disturbingly high. And what about Frank Morris, the mastermind? No confirmed trace, no cards, no photos, no flowers, which somehow makes more sense than the Anglin's trail. Morris was the quiet one, the planner, the man who erased himself. If he survived, he didn't want to be found by his family. He wanted to be gone. He didn't want to be a legend. He just wanted to be a man who wasn't in a cage. Some people think he ended up in Ireland. Others say he died in a different prison under a different name, laughing all the way to the yard. Now let's talk theories, because the they drowned story has more holes than the Anglin's vent covers. The FBI claimed the water temperature, a brisk 54 degrees, would have killed them in 20 minutes. But they were farm boys, used to cold Georgia rivers. And they had the raft. If they stayed out of the water, the temperature was just a nuisance, not a death sentence. Then there's the tide. The Bureau said the tide would have swept them out to sea, but computer models from the Delft Institute in the Netherlands, run decades later, showed that if they left between 11 p.m. and midnight, the current would actually have pushed them toward the north side of the Golden Gate Bridge, specifically Horseshoe Bay. And wouldn't you know it? A car was reported stolen in that area that very night. A 1955 Chevrolet. The U.S. Marshals, who still have the case open by the way, received a letter in 2013. It was signed John Anglin. It said, "Yes, we all made it that night, but barely." It claimed Frank died in 2008 and Clarence in 2011. The writer offered to turn himself in for a year of medical treatment for cancer. The FBI analyzed the handwriting. The results? Inconclusive. That's Fed speak for "it might be him, and we're terrified." So, did they make it? Look, kid, the system hates an unsolved mystery. It likes boxes. It likes endings. But the rock gave them nothing but a cold shoulder and a long walk. Yes, they absolutely could have survived. Modern experiments using the same tide conditions and replica rafts have proven it's not only possible, it's probable if timed correctly. Hypothermia wouldn't have set in fast enough. The current would have carried them to land, not the abyss. And Morris knew that. He wasn't guessing. He was calculating. He had the tide charts. He had the brains. He had the motive. Why does this escape still haunt the feds? Why do we still talk about it while we forget 1,000 other heists and breaks? Because Alcatraz didn't close in 1963, because it was too expensive. That's the official line. But the truth is, it closed because it was exposed. 3 men proved the most feared prison in America was vulnerable. Not to brute force, not to a riot, not to a bloody shootout, but to patience, intelligence, and audacity. They didn't fight guards. They didn't kill anyone. They simply outthought the rock. They took the very thing the prison used to break them, the silence, the routine, the salt air rot, and they turned it into a ladder. Somewhere, maybe under a different name, in a different country, perhaps sitting on a beach in Rio or a porch in the Ozarks, 3 ghosts walked free while the prison that swore it was unbeatable became a museum for tourists to buy overpriced keychains. That's the part that really stings the Bureau. That's the part that keeps the file open. Not just that they escaped, but that they lived long enough to grow old, to see the world change, and to know that they were the only ones who ever truly beat the house. And as for Frank Morris, if he's out there, he's probably watching this and smiling, because the best trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. But the best trick Frank Morris ever pulled was convincing the world he was at the bottom of the bay. That's all for now. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. Better yet, tell me, would you have pulled off such an escape? Let me know in the comments.